Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to this episode of The Numbers. I'm here with Philippe J. Fournier, as always. Philippe, how are you doing these days?
Good to see you, Eric. Bonjour. Hi, everybody. How I'm doing? I'm doing tired. Picketing on, and with my union is it's difficult work. I'm used to being in class or in front of my computer in my office, and now I have to be outside all day, sticking it to the man. And it's cold in Quebec right now, so it's been a tiresome week. What about you, Eric?
No, things have been pretty good. I'm all on my lonesome in terms of running the RIT and doing these podcasts, so no union marching for me. So I get to stay inside where it's nice and warm. Although, yeah, it is getting a little bit colder these days. We're coming to the end of the year. We're going to have some fun episodes over the holidays,
Oh, yes.
and we're going to keep going. So we're not going to be, taking a break. You'll have something in your feed every week, but this week we actually have pretty big poll to talk about.
Oh, yes, we do.
Yeah.
One poll? I'd say 1.5 or 1.25. I think we have a quarter
we
of
have
a poll
several
to discuss.
polls, but there's been one poll that got a lot of attention this week, and it was teased. It was teased.
heavily teased by Mr. Coletto. And I don't mind that as much, but you were kind of expecting, is this going to be like a 12-point jump or something? What's going on? It was teased so much that I think it was built up, perhaps a little too much. But what were your impressions? So, we should say what the poll was for those who don't know. I mean, those who listen to this, I think they know. But still, we should say. So, Abacus Data released its latest round of federal polling, and it has the Conservative lead going from 19 points, which was a tad high, to only 10 points. So 37 for the Conservatives, a drop of 5 points compared to earlier this month. And the Liberals go from 23 to 27%, and the NDP stays stable. I think it was 19% for the NDP. Yeah, it was 19% for the NDP. So I have thoughts, but I'm really curious. You and I didn't get a chance to discuss this week. I was so busy. I want to know what was your reaction, Eric, when you saw this?
I'm really curious to see what the next set of polls is going to be, right? Because we did get a poll from Nanos earlier this week, which is the 4-week trailing poll, and it had shown a jump of 3 points for the Liberals, which is not too unusual for Nanos. Sometimes it goes up and down. But then to see this poll from Abacus, a 10-point lead is a big lead, right? But it's actually been not since September that there's been a lead of 10 points or less in the polls for the Conservatives. So while it is still a huge lead and a 9-point swing is pretty big, this is still a poll that changes kind of the narrative, changes kind of the trend lines. So I think it's really notable from that sense. Now, is it going to be the poll that we all forget about because the next set of polls are going to show the same 15-point lead for the Conservatives? We'll see. But Abacus tends not to be one of those polls that fluctuates a lot.
That's true.
If we saw this from Leger, it would be the same kind of thing. You don't often see the online polls in particular have these kinds of big swings in just a couple of weeks. So I do think it does signify something. What it signifies and whether this is going to continue going forward, I think those are the big questions. Because if instead of being a 15 to 20 point lead for the Conservatives, we're back to a 10-point lead, that changes the conversation quite a bit over the next few months, right? We're no longer talking about the NDP surpassing the Liberals.
No.
We're not talking about a super majority of 200 plus seats for the Conservatives. And maybe Liberals, talk themselves off the ledge and don't really see the need to push Trudeau out so quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think the Conservative number for me, 37, was more interesting than the Liberal number. Because, for those who follow us, you know that Eric and I follow all the polls. And my rolling average on 338 had the Liberals at 25. And that included the Abacus poll that had the Liberals at 23. And one Nanos rolling poll that had them at 22. Léger last week had the Liberals at 26. So 27 in an environment where the Liberals hang around 24, 25, yeah, you're going to get the poll that's 27. But 37 for the Conservatives. We hadn't seen a poll like below 40% for quite a while. At least 3 point. Maybe we had seen a 39, but so that was lower. Now, it felt more like regression to the mean. I don't want to crush the hopes of Liberals listener, of course, but it felt more like regression to the mean. But the thing is, when we see a new trend, we don't know it's a trend until we see much more polling. This is one poll, but it is coming an interesting time because, of course, lots have been happening at the House of Commons. I think lots have been happening in federal politics as well, and I think the projectors were pointed squarely at Monsieur Poilievre for most of the fall, and rightly so. He was leading in by 15 points. He has to look like a future prime minister. So I'm not sure what to. I think I will know what to make of it in hindsight, which I think is often the case with polling. It just so happens that we could be done with federal polling. I don't think Léger is releasing a new one. They had one in December. Ipsos is not releasing a new one. We may get a Main Street. Who hasn't published lately? And we'll get the nanos. We'll see if the jump from last week, a 3-point jump for the Liberals in a 4-week rolling poll. And that's a single week jump. And so this is significant. It's just that it also could be noise. But the fact that the nanos and the Abacus both show a jump for the Liberals in the same week reinforces the idea that there could be something to this. But it's still 10 points, though.
That's it. It is kind of remarkable that a Liberal supporter could look at this and be happy that they're behind by 10 points. But that's, I guess, how bad it's been getting, right, for them. But I think why it also is worth kind of paying attention to is that it makes a little bit of sense, right? The last few weeks have been a little bit more rocky for Pierre Poilievre. Whether you agree with what he did or said or not, the coverage has been a little bit more focused on him, as you said. The projectors are kind of looking a bit more on him than on the government over the last little while. There's been a few missteps, some votes in the House. What it really means, I don't know. But when you look at the numbers that were also in the Abacus poll, it does show that, as you mentioned, it's mostly the Conservatives that seem to have taken a hit here, right? Because the Liberals are up a little bit, but Justin Trudeau's personal numbers still not really very good, hardly moved. Satisfaction with the government hardly moved at all. The number of Canadians who say they would be willing to consider voting for the Liberals hasn't really moved. It's instead that the number who say they would vote for the Conservatives has dropped. Pierre Poilievre's negatives have gone up. And in a really interesting breakdown that Abacus has, those kind of like soft conservatives or the soft liberals, whatever they termed them as. All right, see if I can find it, what exactly they're referring to. Oh, yes, the time who said it was time for a change of government, but they didn't like the alternatives.
Right.
That the Conservatives lost a lot of support among that group. So it all kind of dovetails with what we've seen over the last few weeks, that if you were lukewarm about the Conservatives, that maybe you've been turned off over the last few weeks and going back to the Liberals, maybe reluctantly. So it at least kind of makes sense. You can explain it, right? Which doesn't mean it's actually what's happening, but it at least is a bit easier to explain because of the context. So I think that's why we probably are paying attention a little bit more to this than we would if, for example, if the Conservatives had jumped to 46.
Yeah.
And I think we'd probably be raising a few more eyebrows because it wouldn't really make as much sense in terms of what's been happening over the last 2 weeks.
Trying to find precedent, and those numbers look very similar to the 2008 federal election, right?
Almost identical, yeah.
Well, the Ontario numbers, I have them in front of me right now. So Ontario in 2008, so for those who don't know, it was Stéphane Dion, Liberal leader, against Stephen Harper, of course. 39% Conservative, 34% Liberal. So Dion had better numbers right now in Ontario, but the thing is Dion had much worse number in Quebec. The West was similar. The Liberals were doing okay in the Atlantic provinces, although not great. So, but this was a strong minority by Harper. So I will update my seat projection as I do on Sunday. It's going to tighten up a bit. It's just that, again, regression to the mean feels like Abacus had the gap a bit too wide. And this is not a slight on Abacus. What they do is statistics. It fluctuates. It's normal. But as you said, the jump could have been 44 conservative. And then the narrative for the rest of the holidays and for the rest of December, the rest of 2023 would have changed. Now, we'll see. I'm curious to see now next week's nanos. I don't really I follow nanos, of course, but I'm never really super eager to see it. I'm eager to see the next update, to see if, let's say, last week's jump in Liberal support was just a fluke, or if it goes on a second week, and then you can say, oh, hang on here, there might be something to it. And then suddenly we enter 2024 with a big question mark in the horse race. And as you said, holding on to the ledge for some Liberals, it must have been really hard. I don't know if you listened to The Bridge with Mr. Moore and Mr. Butts. They had a discussion on polls and the effect of polls on caucus and on MPs. I thought it was very interesting. I encourage everybody to go listen to it. Again, those who say they don't look at the polls are lying.
Yeah.
They're lying. They don't have to. They could just say, well, we look at it, of course, but it doesn't matter too much because I'm focused on my work. But they usually, somebody say, I don't look at the polls because I don't believe in it. If you don't believe in the numbers and those and polls in general, don't go into politics because you'll look like a fool. But that's just me saying. So anyway,
I think there's often the people who don't like polls. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of them are people who are supporting a party that is not doing well in the polls. Suddenly they love polls. I'm sure there's a lot of people who liked this poll that didn't like the polls over the last little while.
Nope.
But I think often there's this discussion that the polls are predicting the future, right?
Yep.
Like Democrats in the United States looking at this and saying, like, don't worry about it. The election's next year. Like, these numbers mean nothing. Polls aren't trying to predict the future. I don't know why people think that when a poll comes out now, we're saying that Pierre Poilievre is going to be the prime minister in 2025.
Exactly.
It's about gauging where things are now.
Yeah.
Which is still a very legitimate thing to do, to understand where public opinion is right now. If it didn't matter what happened between elections in terms of public opinion, then why do we care what happens in the House? Why, then we should just be saying, well, it only matters when there's an election. Otherwise, then they get to do whatever they want. What we think about it doesn't matter. That's not how it works. So anyway, if you're complaining about the polls and whether they're going to predict the next election and all this, that's really not what we're talking about.
The thing is, if that's the case, they're probably not listening to us, though, to be fair.
Probably not. Yeah, you're right. Well, then go tell your friends, listener, who makes these comments to listen to this episode. One thing I wanted to say, you mentioned that the Abacus, the last one, might have been a bit too high.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, actually. I wonder if at the end of November, that's when things were really at a plus 17, plus 19, because Angus Reid Institute came out with a poll today, which seemed to me a bit of it was almost like the moment was wrong, because the poll was in the field from, I think, the 24th of November to the 1st of December.
Yeah.
And it also had about a 17-point lead, I think it was, for the Conservatives. And the Nanos poll that was, kind of straddling the end of November had that 20-point-ish lead for the... So I think it's possible that the end of November was like the worst time for the Liberals in polling, and now they're getting better. Maybe that won't be the case once we see some other polls, but that would make some sense in terms of following the numbers. But yeah, the Angus Reid poll came out today, and it's a bit too old now, especially if things have shifted over the last few weeks. Now, there's always a question of whether things can really shift that fast when people aren't paying that much attention. We're not in the midst of a campaign. So I'm open to that kind of discussion, and the idea that this could turn out to be a poll that we all talk about this week, and then the numbers over the next couple of weeks do not reflect it at all. Open to that possibility. But, the numbers make some intuitive sense, and we'll see what other polls are going to say in the coming weeks.
Quebec sovereigntists will love this Angus Reid poll. 37% of the bloc, a 14-point lead against the Liberals and the Conservatives. It's not a crushing number like Gilles Duceppe used to have, but a vote split would mean, 45 seats maybe for the Bloc Québécois? Yeah. Which would be a good harvest and would assure that if it's a minority, the Bloc Québécois would be probably Well, it would be higher than the NDP, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And it would hold a balance of power if it's a minority. But yeah, no, a 17-point lead, if it's a minority, there's something wrong with the system, because that's nearly impossible. It has to be a majority with those numbers. But interesting.
What do you think? You got some more comments on the polls? Do you want to move to the by-election?
Well, the thing is, I was just going to say, to finish on the point of the politicians who don't like polls and say, oh, it's to influence, it doesn't inform. My sports analogies are perfect for politics, because they take a simple issue. People love to think about politics as sports, a team sport, right? It's like
it is in a lot of ways a team sport.
Absolutely. So you open the game. You turn on the game, rather. Sorry, Frenchicism. You turn on the game in the second period, and there's no header that tells you the score. And you're like, okay, so you just see the game going on, but you don't know the score is. So you turn to your friend and say, hey, what's the score? And he says, well, I can't tell you. It's going to influence you. It's like, no, I just want to know the score in the second period. Those who say polling should not be there. Yeah, we need to know the score during the game to better understand how the game ends. So anyway, but I don't need to tell you this.
Maybe that's a good idea for sports networks. When the score gets to 5-0, they take the scoreboard off, because otherwise the viewership's going to go away. Who wants to watch lose a game when the outcome's already decided?
And take the numbers off the players too, so it doesn't influence our enjoyment. And also, just make the screen black. And maybe no sound too. So anyway.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Enough about that.
I do want to talk about the one bit of news kind of electorally over the last few days. Carolyn Bennett announced that she was going to step aside from her seat over the course of the holidays. She's been an MP since 1997, so she's one of the longer serving MPs in the House. Was a cabinet minister. She briefly ran for the leadership in 2006. Toronto St. Paul's is her riding. She's going to, if she vacates it, I think I saw December 31st. That would mean that a by-election would need to be called by the end of June. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to see when that's going to go ahead, because we already knew she was resigning. She had announced that before the cabinet shuffle earlier this summer. The Liberals are running a nomination race, and there's someone who's already come forward, Leslie Church, who has worked a lot with Chrystia Freeland, is seen to be maybe the favorite to win it. So the Liberals might be ready-ish to have a by-election. So I'm wondering if they're going to put him in tandem with Durham, because Durham has to be called by the end of January. But I was looking at your projections for Toronto St. Paul's. You have it actually pretty close.
I have it closer. The thing is, again, it's going to go up this weekend because of the latest polls. Yeah. But the polls in Ontario, I mean, if they showed the Liberals being in the high to mid-20s, and they had 39% last election. And there are many ridings, southwestern Ontario, except the urban centers, where the Liberals are not competitive at all. So to make them lose 15 points or 13 points, or maybe a third of their support, that means that it went down in many places where they used to have support. So it's close. If there was an election today, it would be hard to not have the Liberal there winning. The last time it was PC, well, it was another name, but I think it was the Mulroney era, right? Yeah. It's been a long time since that seat has been Liberal. The NDP has done okay in some elections. The Conservatives usually finish second. I think the NDP finished second in 2011, but I could be wrong about this. But I looked it up. The Conservatives, if they win seats in Toronto, this could be one of them. It's just that the gap is still pretty wide. So
yeah, it would be like the really far down the list.
It would be a rout. It would be a rout.
The NDP finished still third in 2011. I remember looking at it. That was the closest. Yeah, that was the closest Bennett came to getting defeated. But yeah, when you're thinking of the ridings in Toronto, that would go Conservative. It would be like the Etobicoke ones, the York ones, and that kind of thing. And then starting to get down into that area where Toronto St. Paul's is, the Ontario NDP holds the seat. It'll be, I mean, it depends on who the Conservatives can find to run there, right? If they get just a generic kind of candidate, I don't think that would give them much of a chance, because it is a pretty traditional Liberal riding. But it'll be interesting if we do get the two by-elections happening at the same time, which might not be likely, but to have a Toronto St. Paul's and Durham.
They should be at the same time.
Well, it should be.
Come on. I mean,
we should go to my pitch, my set by-election dates every October. Yeah, but no, it's it would be an interesting combination, right? Because you have a pretty safe Conservative seat, a pretty safe Liberal seat, and then kind of see how it breaks down. But I think that one is probably pretty safe for the Liberals, but it'll be a little test of their support in Toronto, right? Because we've seen some polls that have shown them in trouble in the city of Toronto. So this would be a good test for them.
Apologies to our listeners. You're right. I guess I misread something. In 2011, yeah, the NDP finished third. I misread, I guess. So Carolyn Bennett, it was the lowest. She had 40% of the vote in 2011, 8 points in front of the Conservatives. So, yeah. Okay.
Hey, if the Liberals lose a seat they won in 2011, they might as well just fold as a party. Like, they're done.
That's right. Okay, so I smell a live stream then. If there's 2 by-elections on the same night, we're going to have to cover that.
Although, for sure. Might even do an individual one. When I did a by-election for Mississauga Lakeshore a long time ago, I had a pretty big audience.
It was fun. And it was fun. Yeah. So, all right.
Okay.
Deal.
We have some provincial polling, too. I don't want to go too much into the Alberta one that came out from the Angus Reid Institute, because it is part of their quarterly national poll, and it only had 400 people, so it was a pretty small poll.
Yeah.
But did you have any reflections on this poll that came out?
In general, I would say, well, this matches the trend that we have seen. The NDP is holding, what they have. They haven't been building. Danielle Smith, for all the talk about the Alberta pension plan or her fight right now against Monsieur Guilbeault, the environment minister at the federal level, I think the lines are pretty drawn in Alberta, and they haven't moved since the election, not significantly at least. I think Ms. Smith at least succeeded in her first year as premier. She was elected, I think, last October, right? So a year and 2 months. But she won re-election in 2023, and there hasn't been any disaster numbers-wise for her in her first 7 months. So I think that's a success for her. We'll see if she succeeds where other PCs/UCP leaders have failed. It's been a while since a UCP leader has been re-elected, right? And so, but so far, that's what I have to say. The numbers don't surprise me much. Again, the regionals were kind of bizarre from Angus Reid, but it was a small sample, so we shouldn't look too much into that.
There was the numbers they had on the APP, CPP kind of plan, still showing that it's not very popular, that more Albertans would not want to abandon the Alberta pension plan. But earlier this week, I think it was this week or maybe last week, the government more or less said they were kind of backing off from it. They're going to wait till the federal government comes out with the big number that Alberta gets to take from the CPP. So I'm guessing if they are doing their own polling on this, they're probably seeing the same kind of numbers, that this isn't really a winner. It has become definitely partisan when you look at the Angus Reid Institute numbers. New Democrats hate it. UCPers like it. So I think that it's become just a proxy for partisanship, but at the same time, it's still less popular than the UCP. So it is still a vote kind of leaker for the UCP. So it makes sense for them to abandon it.
It's a way to fight the federal government. It's the way to stick it to the federal government. And
but the CPP is not the federal government. The CPP is the rest of the country.
Well, Alberta.
It's not Ottawa.
No, it's true, but. It's true, but in Quebec, we have some of that too, where it's the us against them mentality that's there. Mm-hmm. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't want to go into the economic benefits, because I'm not an expert and I don't pretend to be one. But it is a way to try to draw walls around Alberta and say, we will protect you. Many provinces do this, and it's a vote winner usually come election time. And I don't think Danielle Smith knows how to not campaign, basically.
Let's do a quick go around on Manitoba, because we got a poll from Probe Research. They did one for the Winnipeg Free Press. This is the first kind of in-depth poll out of Manitoba since the election. Has the NDP at 51%, the PC's down to 38%. This would probably be 40 seats for the NDP. Wab Kinew seemingly in the midst of a honeymoon. He was leading in the Angus Reid Institute poll in terms of Premier's approval ratings. Again, not too much surprising here. If I was Jagmeet Singh in the NDP, I would go give Wab Kinew a hug and not let him go.
And make sure to have pictures and videos
Yeah.
of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you see the support in Winnipeg? 59% for the NDP. Thing is, which is interesting, right? But you can't win more seats in Winnipeg.
No, not
naturally,
too many more, no.
naturally, there's no election right now. But I would say to the NDPers in Winnipeg and Mr. Canoe, this is really the definition, the textbook definition of a honeymoon, a post-election honeymoon. Enjoy it, because even though it feels good right now, it will not last. It will not last through the whole 4 years. So I think if you have hard policy decisions to make, this is the time to make it. Not when you get closer to the next election. But the PCs, do we have an idea? I know there's a race, a leadership race coming. I'm guessing it's going to be sometime in 2024. I don't know if you saw any about this. I saw conflicting articles about this, so I don't think they decided yet.
Yeah, the last I heard is that they were still kind of figuring that out, and Heather Stephenson still technically the leader.
Yeah.
Hard to imagine she wants to go back to the legislature in the spring as the leader of the opposition when you're a former premier. So maybe that'll clarify some things. But that'll be the next kind of one to watch. What's going to happen in terms of who's going to try to run for the PC leadership. And I imagine, though, there's not going to be a lot of Manitoba conservatives very interested in that provincial job. When they're thinking about their political future, they're probably a little bit better off trying to be in Pierre Poilievre's cabinet than to become the leader of the official opposition in Winnipeg.
That's fair, but I think the thing that I said, Eric, on this podcast right after the election was that even though the campaign, the PC campaign in Manitoba, went to dark places at some point during the campaign, the party's in good shape. I mean, the NDP's in a honeymoon. You still get 38% of vote intention, and you have 22 seats province-wide. So I think, for those who have the ambition of one day being a conservative premier in Manitoba, this is not a bad job to get. But as you said, the federal positions may be more interesting.
All right, let's do some questions. We've gotten through the polls pretty quickly today, so we might actually be able to do a few more questions this week.
All right.
But I'll combine these two questions there from the Discord. So if you're listening to this and you're not a member of our Patreon, we solicit our questions from members of the Patreon. They can ask their questions on our Discord or on our Patreon page. You can join at thenumberspod.ca. So we got these two questions. They were from Ali Gursoy and Bride and JC. Ali Gursoy asked, and just goes back to what we were talking before, are we actually witnessing a Liberal recovery? If so, is it a result of Liberals starting to deliver results in areas such as dental care and housing, or is it the very partisan and risky strategy by Poilievre in recent weeks with the filibuster attempt and the divergent stance on Ukraine? This is how Ali asked the question. And then kind of similarly, Bride and JC asked, if this is the start of a Liberal rebound, what are the precedents for it? And what are the most likely factors explaining the turnaround? If this is either a blip in the polls, why now, and what will the Conservatives do in reaction? So I guess that's the question. Are we actually witnessing the turnaround? It feels like it's the simple question to that would be, I think, it's too early to say.
It's too early. I mean, it's a boring answer, and I apologize, Ali and Bryden. It's a boring answer to a good question, or good questions, should I say. It's way too early. I mean, by next week, perhaps we'll have more data that point in the same direction, and maybe. But I'm not going to stay here and get excited about the poll that looks, as I said earlier, like a regression to the mean. But I think the interesting part of those questions, I mean, one is why, and two, are there precedent of a party, a governing party, falling that much in the poll and then even recovering a little bit? There has to be, but I'm thinking the Harper years from 2011 to 2015, the numbers moved around a lot. Justin Trudeau, when he was first elected leader of the Liberals, went up in the first place, and then he went down, and then Thomas Mulcair went up and he went down, and so there was a lot of fluctuation in those 4 years. But
the thing was with the Conservatives as the government, they often just held their support. And it was the other parties going up or down, right? There was times, like, for example, I think when Stéphane Dion first became leader, the Liberals moved narrowly ahead.
Yeah.
When Ignatieff became leader, I think there was a little while when the two parties were more or less tied. But if I'm thinking about like a government that's really down in the dumps and is able to get back, we have a couple of recent examples. Manitoba PCs, they were behind by like 20 points. And they managed to kind of get things closer before the campaign.
That's right.
The UCP in Alberta was also way behind under Jason Kenney. Had a change of leadership. Daniel Smith came in. They fell back again, and then were able to end up winning the election. So I think there are some easy precedents to point towards. You can even think about the Liberals themselves, the Trudeau Liberals, after the SNC-Lavalin affair.
Yeah.
They dropped back by, what was the largest gap at that point? Probably 8 or 9 points?
No, it was more than that. I think it was 12. There was a couple of double digits there. It was fast, though. It was from April to July.
Yeah.
I think by the end of the summer, the numbers had tightened up a bit. And so we've seen these big leads since July for the Conservatives, so almost 6 months. So again, good questions. It's too early. Let's revisit that in January when we get the. I mean, we know that the new year is a very interesting period in politics because families get together, friends get together. You have some vacation, you talk about politics, and then you come back. Of course, the classic is the 2006 election, right? Which had begun in December 2005, and the numbers were pretty close between Paul Martin and Stephen Harper. And then right after Christmas and New Year's, you saw the gap open, and the Conservatives never looked back. So it feels like people talked about it and suddenly were more comfortable with this new Conservative Party.
One other thing, there was a question here about what will the Conservatives do in reaction? It kind of goes back to what we were saying about in that podcast with James Moore and Jerry Butts for Peter Mansbridge's podcast. It changes the mood, right? Yeah. Liberals were going into the holidays feeling that they were all doomed and the government's going to defeat, and do they have to get rid of Trudeau? Instead, what they had was the voting marathon session that the Conservatives did, which wasn't really long enough to cause a problem because they said they're going to keep them home for Christmas. They ended up delaying things for like a day and a half. Yeah. But those kinds of events are almost like team building exercises. Conservatives are already doing well in the polls. They probably don't need a team building exercise, but the Liberals seem to be pretty jazzed about it. The fact that they got all of these votes that they can say the Conservatives voted against this and that, and they seem more energized. And this poll, if it's not refuted by a new poll in the next couple of weeks, will send them all back to their constituencies in a little bit of a better mood that maybe 2024 will be better than 2023. Yeah. And then what are the Conservatives going to do? Are they going to say just a single poll? We still got a big lead. Don't change the plan. Or do they try to maybe, kind of back off a little bit? Because you could kind of see that over the last little while, there is a little bit of a bravado maybe. They're so far ahead in the polls.
Yeah.
They don't need to worry about anything. And maybe they'll pump the brakes a little bit. So I think that's actually pretty interesting because, as you said, we don't know until other polls come out, but it will change maybe the next few weeks in terms of people's moods.
All right, Donald Clancy on the Patreon asks, as support for the Parti Québécois grows in Quebec, what will that inspire increased support for yes on Quebec separation as well? So is the support for Parti Québécois translate into a support for sovereignty? Are the two items related? And it's funny that Mr. Clancy asked this because we've had recent data on this, and we can have an answer that is twofold. If I may go first, Eric, of course. First, we had two polls back-to-back that showed the Parti Québécois in 30 and 31%. It was Abacus Data and Léger. And the two polls asked the sovereignty question. The numbers were different, but the trend line was pretty much the same. Léger had 34% in favor of sovereignty, and Abacus had 39% in favor of sovereignty. So you could say it's different, but in both cases, compared to the previous poll of the same firm, didn't move beyond the margin of error. So PQ goes up 11 points, 12 points, depending on which poll you look at, and sovereignty stays pretty much flat. That tells me that it's not new sovereigntists that the PQ is recruiting, but former sovereigntists that were lending their vote to the CAQ. It could lead to increased support in sovereignty, but so far empirically the data doesn't say this.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that, aside from the fact that since the Parti Québécois is now in first place, it's getting a little bit more attention, and so it'll have the opportunity to talk more about independence than would have been the case before. So will that have an impact? I don't know. Quebecers have been talking about this for decades, and I'm not sure if it'll change anything. But so far, we haven't seen any sort of relationship between the two.
I'll say this, though. A pollster told me that he was polling recently on sovereignty, and he said instead of just asking, would you vote for or against, would you vote yes or would you vote no, ask if you are in favor or if you're opposed, and have the degree, like, are you very opposed or very in favor, right? And he said the very opposed is very strong. Like, so yes, there is like a third to maybe almost 40% of Quebecers that say they would vote for sovereignty, but that bloc that is still against is really holding strong. And so even if the support for sovereignty goes to 41-42, that 55% against will be very hard to overcome. Now, I'm not saying it will never happen. We don't know the future. But it's 3 years from now will be the election, and M. Plamondon said if he's elected, referendum in a first mandate. So it could come closer than we think.
We have a question here, again going to the federal. It was from ASAQC or ASA Quebec. Would another Conservative leader have achieved such a large-scale polling lead? And he says it's clear that the Liberals are unpopular. How much does the Conservative lead have to do with Poilievre? Focusing on issues like housing and his effective skills as a politician, as the questioner said, versus people just wanting any Conservative as they are the default alternative to the Liberals. I think my view is that Poilievre is responsible for a lot of it. I don't think he's entirely it. But when you compare him to Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer, I think it's pretty clear that he is a more compelling politician. He's got extra gears, I would say, and he's had much better message discipline, I'd say, than either of the other two. So I think that a lot of it has to be given to Poilievre. Doesn't mean someone couldn't have done better.
Yeah.
But I think that I don't think it can just be put at the feet of the Liberals, that it's just them and that they've turned people off. I think that the Conservatives have done their fair share as well.
At the Conservative convention in Quebec City, I can tell you, and I spoke to a lot of people there, members, MPs, activist journalists there. Poilievre is beloved from the Conservative base. They really, really love the guy and his attitude, and his in-your-face attitude that sometimes we think, oh, maybe that's going a little too strong. Many Conservative voters absolutely love this. So, it's difficult to compare him to his predecessor. I mean, Andrew Scheer was a terrible campaigner. He was not really good. Aaron O'Toole had a good start of the campaign in 21. He had some wind against him that probably was not fair, but I don't think we can compare the two, the three of those guys. But I can tell you that Poilievre, if he had a vote of confidence right now, the same way that some we see at Québec Solidaire or other party, he would get in the high 90s, I'm sure, of support from the members, because he is beloved from the base.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the kind of people that probably voted for Jean Charest in the last leadership race might not be still holding a Conservative membership card.
They have left or have rallied. Yeah.
Let's move to some provincial question from Conrad AML on the Discord. And he asked, in British Columbia, how likely is it that the anti-NDP vote consolidates behind either BC United or the Conservatives by the election? It seems like one of the problems for them at the moment is that the vote split makes it unclear which one is the tactical, the strategic vote. And he says, do we know how strong or weak the current United and Conservative support is? I think there's a good chance that it does coalesce. We've seen that that's the history of BC politics. It used to be the Socreds, and then it was the BC Liberals, and now it could be the BC Conservatives. But there was a poll that was done. It was by Leger in the fall, and while it wasn't like a huge number, more people who were BC Conservatives were unaware of the name change for the BC United. Now, that doesn't mean that that they're only voting Conservative because they didn't know and that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that, but it does suggest that there's a chunk of the Conservative vote that might not be super attached to the Conservative Party and might be easier to shake off. But I don't know. I think it could simply be whoever's leading in the polls by next August, when because the election, I guess, will be called in September-ish.
Yeah.
But whoever's leading, I think it's almost like in Ontario politics, or
that's what
instead of the Progressive primary, it'll be the Conservative primary.
Well, the thing is, that's what I was about to say. You would think that the anti-NDP vote would coalesce. Didn't we say that about Doug Ford in 2022? And how did that turn out? Both parties at 24%, or just below 24%. And so, to beat the NDP, they would have to join hands at some point. They would have to find a way to have an arrangement. It's not going to happen this year, of course. So realignments can take time. Sometimes realignments are messy, and I'm looking at these numbers right now. As you said, some people would say they vote Conservative because they like the brand. I'm not saying they don't like the party. It's just that they don't know the difference between the parties, right? Whereas the Uniteds, they just sold and destroyed the brand that they have, even though they judged themselves that the Liberal brand was bad or not good enough for them. So we'll see. But one party could overtake the other, or they could both get 20%, and we're going to see a super majority for Mr. Eppie. I think the latter is more likely than the former.
Yeah. There was some chatter, apparently, that the two are open to merger talks, but it doesn't seem like that's very serious, because I don't think either of them would back down, because, the Conservatives don't hold any seats aside from their two floor crossers. So there's a lot of BC United MLAs who might be the incumbents, but might actually not be the favorites anymore. You're looking at the Peace River kind of ridings. Like, I really don't see, because right now it feels to me that the BC Conservatives have their foot on the neck of BC United, and I don't see what the incentive would be for them to take it off at any point, because the longer this goes on, the more power they'll have, right? But we need to see some fundraising. They still haven't been. The last time I saw the numbers, they're still raising like in the tens of thousands versus the hundreds of thousands of of BC United in every quarter. So, we'll see if the money is going to start talking.
A merger is not happening before they get a test, before they get an election. And if let's say the election is in October, occurs, and in votes they are fairly similar, just a few points apart, then I would say maybe. But right now, why would the Uniteds do that? What would that party become? Would they become the United Conservatives? They would have to be, right?
The United Conservatives of British Columbia?
Well, yeah, there you go. A new brand, two neighboring province having a United Conservatives. But oh well. We'll talk about BC tons during 2024, I'm sure. Yeah.
How about we close with this question here? And I'm not sure if you'll have any off the top of your head, but NLC's Milk, who still has the most confusing name for us on the Discord. And he said, any good Christmas gift ideas for those that love Canadian politics? He says, besides a subscription to the Red 338 Canada or the Numbers, which is, of course, the best gift you could give anybody. Show them you really care. And get in touch with us. We can arrange gift subscriptions if you'd like. And we'll tie them with an electronic bow. But anyway, he says, do we have any suggestions for gifts, such as books or anything like that for people who like Canadian politics? Does anything come to the fore for you?
Well, the thing is, I haven't been reading much in this fall because I was way, way too busy. I talked about it. I was almost burnt out in the middle of fall because I can't say no to. I don't know how to say no to people, and so I did too much. But the thing is, the holidays is usually a time when I finish marking my exams. I wind down. I put some music on. I look at the snowflakes fall over the window. I have my cats on my lap. this is where I catch up on my reading. And I'm really looking forward to read that John Ibbotson book about Diefenbaker and
The Duel.
Yeah, exactly. I have it. I haven't started reading it. I hear it's good. Did you read it, or did you?
No, I haven't.
But I really want to read that because it is a period of time in Canadian politics that I don't know much about. I know the main actors. I just don't know much of the issues that were there. I want to know more. I don't have a diploma in history, my friend. I'm a physicist. And so I want to know what's going on there. So this is one of the books that I'll be looking forward to read. What about you?
Yeah, that covers the elections, I think, from 58 to 65. So there's 4 consecutive elections with the Liberals led by Lester Pearson and the Conservatives by John Diefenbaker. And you have a period of Diefenbaker's tumultuous time in office, Pearson's time as leading in a minority government. Really just an interesting kind of thing. I guess we haven't had, I don't think, that many of elections with the same 2 people in it. I don't know if there's been 4 elections with the same 2 main leaders. Harper and Layton were against each other in the same amount of elections in Duceppe, but not the Liberal leader. But anyway, that's it. It'll be interesting. For me, what am I looking forward to? I tend to buy old books, so anything I would mention would probably be like you'd have to get it from a used bookseller. But I got this question recently, like if you had to give someone a gift. There's actually a really good book. It's called Dynasties and Interludes. It's by John Pamet and Lawrence Leduc, I think, they were the ones who were the editors. And it's really just a book about federal elections going from 1867 all the way to I think the latest edition had 2015, maybe 2019. And it just goes over every single election. And I refer to it all the time. It's a good read. It's got lots of polling data in it and stuff like that. So if you can find a copy of that, I would suggest that would be highly recommended. The place to start, and then you can fill in the gaps with all these extra readings over time.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, you know what? That sounds good to me. Maybe I'll dive into that during the holidays.
There you go. How about we do our numbers of the week?
Just to for our listeners who listen to me, our members who listen to me say I had a quiz for you this week. I'm going to keep it for next week because it was not polished enough. I have a quiz for Eric in our French podcast that's coming up, but I will have some pretty good quizzes during the holidays, so look forward to that.
I think you might have to save the quiz until January because we got a very special episode coming soon. No, I guess next week we could do the quiz. That's true. Next week we can do the quiz.
The over-under episode.
The annual over-under.
Our third
annual.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've actually been doing this. This will be the third one. We'll see who won in 2023.
Well, that's the thing. The only one that was complete, we had a tie, right? We finished tied. And so I don't remember what I said, except that I did say that UCP was going to win. That's it. But I don't remember.
I went too hard on the Alberta NDP. I'm gonna get.
Anyway, number of the week. I have to say, I'm going to go back to the Abacus Poll and say 32. 32% Liberal support among the 18 and 29-year-old bracket. Didn't we say that most polls in the fall showed a resurgence of the Conservatives among the young? And, this was a pretty good sample. It was 1,900 people in total. And so has something moved young people, or again is this just a statistical blimp that Abacus did get? So I will check on those numbers. The next Abacus poll, whenever it is, maybe next week, maybe next month, I'm going to check to see if that young voter crowd just changed its mind on Poilievre. Yeah,
that to me stood out because if it wasn't primarily young voters that moved over to the Liberals. Yep. It was a big chunk of it because they're up 8 points and only up 4 nationally. So it would be disproportionately among the young. But is that a real thing? Because it was so specific to younger voters, makes me wonder. But that'll be something to watch. I'm not sure why younger Canadians would have been turned off of Poilievre. Maybe they thought he was more centrist or something. I don't know. I don't have an easy explanation for it, which is what makes me wonder a little bit. For me, I'm also going to go back to the Abacus poll. So 36% is going to be my number. This was the number of Canadians who had a positive and a negative impression of Pierre Poilievre. So he's now tied. That was a net -6 swing because his positives went down by 3, his negatives went up by 3. And it's the first time that those numbers aren't positive, that he's not a net positive, since early October. So again, this is why one of those things that we look at when we say we're trying to explain why the Conservative number came down. It does seem like it might have been more driven by Pierre Poilievre rather than Trudeau, whose numbers more or less stayed the same. So that'll be something to watch as well. If we see in the next poll the same kind of numbers and Poilievre's numbers are again on the personal side not as great as they were before, then we have an indication that the Conservative numbers are indeed coming down, and it's because of Pierre Poilievre, at least a little bit. But again, maybe this will all be refuted.
Absolutely.
When we next chat.
It's too early, but what fun would it be if we had to wait all the time, right? So
yeah,
we'll get to it.
Okay, well, this will be it for this episode. And as I mentioned, we still got, I guess, 2 more for the rest of the year. Next week will be one of our patrons-only episodes. So if you want to not miss out on that, you can go to thenumberspod.ca. And members of the Patreon also get to join in our Discord, which is a good place to have discussions. It's really where what I consider my social media now.
It's fantastic. It
not really enjoying any of the other ones anymore. So if you're already supporting us, then thank you so much, and we'll say hello on the Discord. And Philippe, we've got 2 more to go before the end of the year, and I'm also really looking forward to just snuggling up on the couch, also with my cat. We're just cat guys.
Oh yeah,
and just bask in the peace and tranquility over the holidays.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for supporting us in this project. I appreciate it. Merci beaucoup, Eric. Talk to you next week.